process there.
So complicated.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are live. Knock yourself out.
Welcome back to FTR's continuing coverage of CPAC 11. With us is Vikrant Reddy. Vikrant, what organization are you with?
I am with RightOnCrime.com, a national campaign to establish the genuinely conservative position on criminal justice issues.
What are the goals of Right on Crime?
The goals of Right on Crime, actually I tell people there's one big mega goal, that's to evangelize for the Texas model on criminal justice, which of course people say, what's the Texas model?
Well, I'm here with the Texas trendy chick, Ashley. I mean, who is... Well, Texas. Right? So what is the Texas model?
The Texas model is essentially this. You know, in the last 6 years, we've managed to cut crime in Texas dramatically. I think we have the lowest crime rate we've had since 1973. And whenever I tell people about this, they say, well, that's impressive, but Lord only knows how much money you must have spent to get that done. And I tell them, no, we've actually managed to save money. Texas enacted certain structural reforms that changed the way we approach criminal justice, and they've been tremendously successful. Essentially, what those reforms come down to is this. We started asking ourselves, isn't there really a difference at the end of the day between violent criminals who belong in prisons, who you need to lock up, killers, rapists, people like that, and nonviolent criminals who don't need to be in there with all of these incredibly dangerous people? There are folks who bounce hot checks. There are teenagers who get locked up because they're stealing lawn equipment out of garages. They go into these prisons, which are incredibly costly for taxpayers. I mean, the difference in expense between incarceration and probation and parole options are just staggering. And they go in, they come out worse than when they started. I mean, they're spending time with terrible people. And the recidivism rate is incredibly high. I think it's 68% in this country.
That's incredible.
Well, at a certain point, the system is just not working. And the reason that I find that so tragic as a conservative is that I really don't think the government should be doing half the things it is doing, but in the very limited sphere of things the government ought to be doing, it is public safety. I mean, that is a legitimate and essential core function of government. So more than anything, I really feel like taxpayers need to demand that it's accountable. They need to say to their government, look, this criminal justice system has to work. It has to be done as efficiently as possible. This is the thing you have to get right. You have to get public safety and national defense right, period. And I don't think we're getting it right now, not with that kind of a recidivism rate, not with the expense that's involved in maintaining prisons. There's a lot that needs to be changed, and I think that Texas, we've got this reputation for being tough on crime, and I think we are, but I think we're also very smart on crime, which you don't get a lot of credit for. And a lot of these initiatives were pushed by the Texas Public Policy Foundation, which is a think tank in Austin, where I live and work. And my colleague Mark Levin had the idea that why only do this in Texas? Why not spread this message throughout the country? And it's something that has to be done at the state level. I want to emphasize. There really isn't much of a role for Washington D.C. In these initiatives. Frankly, that's probably the way I like it. But
so you're saying that are you looking at this more of something that goes on a state-by-state basis?
Exactly. In fact, what we're doing that a lot of your listeners might be interested in knowing about is that we are selecting certain states that are ripe for reform because they've got terrific conservative governors and they've got just the right political climate and they're spending too much on their prisons. And we are doing individual rollouts in all of these states with media members: Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, looking into Florida. You're from Indiana. We're taking a look at Indiana. Mitch Daniels has been terrific up there.
He is wonderful.
Yeah.
I must gush over my governor.
Well,
he's
on
just wonderful.
These particular issues, he's announced that he's going to look into having a whole new paradigm on the way that Indiana approaches its criminal justice issues. And yeah, we're doing these individual rollouts. We're talking with members of the press, and we're getting people interested in these issues. And I think we've really hit the perfect moment. We conducted this poll that showed that of the top 18 things people were concerned about in this country, crime was number 17. And that's actually a good thing, because that means we're at a point right now where we can speak about the issues very thoughtfully. There's not a lot of demagoguery on both sides. It may have been that way 20 years ago, but it's not right now. Oh, that said, I mean, I think I would just say that there's still a problem. That doesn't mean that the system is functioning the way it ought to be.
Well, as a fellow Texan, and my brother is actually a police officer in Southlake.
Oh, terrific.
So I'm curious as to where it trickles down to the local level. How is the state functioning within certain precincts and districts and cities to get it implemented, I suppose?
Well, I think only thing of a. Ask me in a more specific way what you have in mind. Sorry about that, but
Actually,
No,
your question wasn't specific enough. Go drill down.
I like to cast a broad net so you can
There
just
you go.
go wherever you want to.
That's right.
right.
That's right.
As far as
I
the
feel like you have something in mind that you're hinting
no,
at.
I really don't.
Okay.
As far as the implementation of the policy goes,
Right.
how is your organization working with local level police officers
Okay,
and law
okay.
enforcement officials?
Okay, no, I think I understand better now. I think that with respect to the way we work with local groups and local police officers, I think there's a section of our website entitled Law Enforcement, and I think here what we really try to do is talk about different models that have been pioneered in the last few years for improved law enforcement. I know that a lot of your listeners are familiar with broken windows policing. They may be familiar with CompStat policing. And, they're a little too detailed to get into, but the bottom line, I would say, with all of these different new types of policing is that we've seen these incredible innovations in management theory just in the past, 2 or 3 decades. And it's great that they work for Fortune 500 corporations, but they also work with police precincts, I mean, you can take individual captains and you can say, look, this part of town is your responsibility, and at the end of a 1, 2, 6 month period, whatever, I'm going to evaluate how well you've done, and if crime hasn't gone down there, it's on you. And you've introduced a lot of very essential conservative principles, accountability, incentives into that whole system. I think you find it works. It's worked in New York City.
That is fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, you said earlier that crime on your list of 18 when you've done your survey, crime comes in at 17. Yeah, I remember in the 80s and early 90s, probably into the mid-90s, crime was actually a pretty big issue. I remember
Huge issue.
When President Clinton said that he was going to put 1 million more officers on the streets. It seemed like crime was a big part of presidential campaigns, and I honestly don't recall crime being an issue from about 2000 on. Now, is this because, clearly, the attacks on our country happened after the 2000 election, but is it because issues like terrorism, immigration, and other things have just so overcome us that it seems like the idea of crime is actually going down? Or is crime rate also going down? The
crime rate is going down, and there's a really fascinating story that I like to tell. It starts in the 1960s, when a lot of bad things started. In the 60s,
yeah,
you had these...
a lot of things can be pinpointed to the 60s. I just gotta say.
Bill Clinton, I'll briefly say, once said something that I thought was remarkably intelligent. He said, American people are divided into 2 types, those who think the 60s were fundamentally good and those who think the 60s were fundamentally bad. I think Bill Clinton and
I like that.
He's kind of right on that.
He's right on that one. I think he and I might be on different sides of that question, but I think it's a really great insight on his part. In any event, in the 60s, you have these progressive and liberal academics pushing all of these theories about rehabilitation and treatment and how everybody can be saved and how awful incarceration is. They're right that incarceration is awful, but they were wrong about the notion that, everybody needs to be involved in some kind of treatment or rehabilitation program. And at a certain point, there are killers and rapists and, violent felons who they need to be incarcerated. But these people were put into all sorts of programs that, it was thought would be superior to prison, make them better, that would reduce the crime rate, and they were just completely wrong. The crime rate, a lot of your listeners will think of movies from the 1960s and 70s, things like Serpico and, some of these films about just the awful gangster land that, New York City had become and a lot of the urban areas in the United States. And there's a reason that stuff was written about and filmed in pop culture. It's because it was a big issue in American society at that time.
Well, it seems like every other show on television now is either a crime drama or reality show. It's not as if the interest, I guess, in crime has gone down or anything.
No, it hasn't. It's always going to be a huge issue. it appeals to the dark side of the American psyche. But what I did want to say about that period from the 60s is that we fought back against that. And the way we fought back against it, with a lot of conservative initiatives, was with a philosophy that could probably just be summed up by saying, lock them up and throw away the key. And it worked in a certain sense. Crime has gone down. You've locked up a lot of
I
people.
was gonna say I really have no problem with that.
Yeah, no, I have no problem with that.
Throw that key away.
I have no problem with it when it comes to violent felons. When
Right.
it comes to non-violent criminals, I'm beginning to wonder if maybe the pendulum has swung too far the other direction. So, the statistic that I love to quote to people is that there was a 20-year period, I want to say it was between about 1980 and 2000, where Florida dramatically increased the number of prisons that they had. New York dramatically reduced the number of prisons that they had. The crime rate in New York went down by 16%. The crime rate in Florida went up by 16%. And what that says to me is that opening prisons doesn't necessarily reduce crime, and closing prisons doesn't necessarily reduce crime. There's a lot of complicating factors here. And what we're trying to do at Right on Crime is figure out what is the most efficient way to get crime down. What are those factors? What is the way to do this with the least harm to taxpayers? Because at the end of the day, it's the most important thing.
Absolutely. Well, Vikrant, I thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I know that Ashley and I are very grateful for sitting down.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I really enjoyed being here. I'm sorry that I flubbed the question, Ashley, a little bit.
No, don't even
But
worry about
I
it.
certainly enjoyed talking with the two of you today.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you so much. And if there's anything that we can do to help get the message out more, please let
Real
us
quick,
know.
yeah, what's the name of the website again?
It's rightoncrime.com. I think one last thing I'd want to say is that for anybody who may be skeptical on the conservative side, take a look at our website and read our statement of principles and the signatories, which include Grover Norquist, Newt Gingrich, Ed Meese, Bill Bennett, just titanic conservative names, people who are considered to be very serious, thoughtful intellectuals in the conservative movement, and they jumped on board with great enthusiasm. We're happy to have them.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Vikrant. Thank you for your time. You're listening to FDR's continuing coverage of CPAC. We'll be right back.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun. So, who did I just talk to exactly? Like, what radio station or what internet station? What is FTR radio?
From the Right Radio.
From the Right Radio.
And it is basically a conservative online radio station made up of bloggers.